Exactly. Let me just hide the towel that's back there.
I like to hide things with. Oh.
Not this.
And we're all good. Hello, friends. Welcome in. Happy Sunday. Good morning. Happy time zone. We are here with the lovely co-host Jupy and our lovely guest Faye today. I will let them introduce themselves when the time comes, but if you are new here, my name is B. I use they them pronouns. I am a queer and disabled variety broadcaster here on the twitch.tv website we find ourselves on begrudgingly these days. But I wanted to I will introduce myself and I will have Jupy introduce themselves like we normally do, but I also wanted to just take a quick second and kind of reiterate what I threw on the timeline on our Twitter page today, which is just that we've not gone a single stream this week so far without being follow botted or hate rated, so it very well could happen again today. All of the procedures they're in place, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, just show Faye lots of love. They're a good bean, and they deserve it all. And what else would I want? What did I? Oh, and also, I'm sure that they will talk about it a little bit today, but like, Faye is not the first guest and will not be the last guest that is currently not streaming due to everything that's going on. But they're still a human of Twitch, and this is still like an important part of what's happening in this space. So we will continue on as we were scheduled to do so. So just keep that in mind. Here's their little guest introduction thingy majiggy. Also has their Twitter and fanhouse, so even though they're not streaming, you can go check them out on those other places where they're still making content. So, Jupy, it's all yours. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jupiter. You may know me as Joyful Jupiter here on Twitch. I am a queer and Latina variety broadcaster of some kind on this platform. And I'm an actor and host as well, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. So, Faye, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
Yes. See, I'm always bad at this part because I'll have a whole paragraph planned out and then I go to speak and my mouth's like, you know what? Fuck the plan. But hi, I'm Faye. My pronouns are they, he, she. They were any, but I put them in order because people would keep putting she in front. And I was like, you know what? I don't like that. So, I don't really ascribe to gender. If you must refer to me, I prefer my name ultimately. But I am a variety content creator in general. I am a fairy and stoner chef. I explore lots of different kinds of content. I'll show behind the scenes of like my chef job, and then I'll post my art, and then I'll post some sexy shit, and then I'll talk about intersectionality and justice. I'm got my finger in a lot of different pies. So if you like that kind of chaotic energy, then yeah.
Love that for you. We always get our bios mostly from folks Twitter and Twitch like about section, and if y'all don't know, my lovely mod and partner creates them in the morning, and I did have to give you a good little heckle, so if you should read yours, Faye.
Oh god. Flirting on the Twitter timeline accurate.
They were like, "Can I put this in here? Is that too much?" I was like, "No."
That's brand. Have you seen my Twitter header? Like,
who doesn't like flirting on the timeline? That's all I want to know. Like, it's fun.
Timeline just reeks of queer energy. It's disgusting.
I love that for you, though. We need more of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
it's
like
because of queerly though, and they're a little.
B started this. You started this, B.
They introduced me to all of the hot people, and now I have to flirt with them all. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know how I feel about being blamed for this. Actually,
you knew exactly what you were doing.
Queer polycule when
exactly, that's been the running joke.
I mean, our team is basically like a little queer commune, so
look,
it's fine.
If you wanted to get a giant house and live in it, I'd be down.
We all do have like a strange desire to move to Seattle, so it could work out.
That'd be a good place to
The
have.
sexy vampire house when?
Yeah. That would be a whole vibe for sure.
Honestly, we would all thrive there.
Oh my gosh, y'all are cute. I can't. I don't think I'm emotionally prepared for the next
flames.
hour and a half.
Well, perfect time for us to just dive right in then.
I'm making up for being horribly late with chaotic energy. All right, let's just.
Look,
You're fine, Bean.
it's Sunday. We're vibing. There's no, we make the schedule here, so there's absolutely no stress and no worry. All right. So I think B and I explained this a little bit, but we have, a number of questions that we've written down based on what you've told us about your life and your experiences and things that you would be, interested in talking about yourself today. But we like to kind of just let the conversation flow. We like to keep it, really natural and good vibes. So if something strikes you, if you want to go on a tangent, if you want to explore something further, like please feel free. We're not very rigid with our questions. It's just more of like a baseline guide, and we'll just go from there.
Gotcha.
So the first question we have for you today is, what was your experience like growing up in predominantly white neighborhoods being mixed race?
It was interesting because you get one of two reactions, right? You get, well, depending where you are, you either get disgust from the parents usually, especially at the age where I was growing up, and the kids mirrored that, or you're a unicorn basically. So it's people perceive you as like a weird, like fun experiment instead of a person a lot of the time, just to kind of put it in a nutshell. And I think it ultimately goes down into how I perceived like my attractiveness because people weren't used to seeing someone that looked like me, so they were either fascinated or grossed out. So it was meeting people who didn't really learn that behavior yet, because racism is a learned behavior, right? And I made friends with them, and they were all kind of like misfits. I made friends with all the misfits growing up because I moved around a lot too. So it was a combination of like constantly having to gauge the kind of climate of the school, if that makes sense. Because even like the black kids, I didn't really hang out with them either because they stuck together and they saw me. I'm equally a unicorn to them, you know what I mean? And depending on how their parents were, colorism doesn't affect me. I'm not gonna try and claim that at all. I'm obviously like lighter. Colorism affects people who are darker. Let's not get that twisted. But there is a level of like, you're too light for us, and the white people are like, you're just light enough, you know what I mean? So it was just kind of like, I didn't really think about it until other people mentioned it, you know what I mean? It was one of those things about growing up that was like, why are people reacting to me this way? Why are parents reacting to me this way? And then it wasn't until I got like way older that I was like, oh, racism, fun,
Now I understand.
So it was just kind of, and then like growing up, I didn't get asked out, I didn't get invited to dances and things. It was very much just like I made friends where I could, and most of the time people approached me, you know what I mean? I was very much, I learned quickly to like observe people because of how people had reacted. So it was a very much learned behavior for me to just like step back and let people come to me, because that would alleviate a lot of the stress for me and like potential rejection, I think. But yeah. Oh, and teachers were a whole mess. The amount of like microaggressions from teachers. Ask your fucking uncle. And don't know those things when you're a kid. And I think that's why it's so gross, because you really don't understand why you're being treated that way as a kid. Like there's no grasp of like, why am I different? You know what I mean? And I wasn't dumb, like I was very smart. I just was chaotic. And then, people used to pick on me, be like, oh, you're Little Miss Chatterbox. I had a little Miss Chatterbox shirt. I remember it. But it became a running joke instead of something I loved. And so like little things like that. And it was weird because it was clothes. There's a lot of things. I'm sorry.
No, so don't apologize. You're good.
We weren't well off, so I didn't always I wore a lot of the same clothes, right? So that played into it. So I wasn't well off, and I was mixed. And so people just picked me apart. You know what I mean? I had this sweatshirt that said sun kissed on it, and people would call me skunk kissed, because I was smelly or dirty, or my hair was dirty, or even though, I showered every day, like I was very clean, but I wasn't, doused in Bath and Body Works, you know what I mean? And had
their
little
perception
Ugg
of
boots
clean.
and exactly. So, and I'm in Texas now, but I grew up in Texas for most of my early childhood. So like all of those like little trends, like I remember, what was it? Justice. It was this clothing store called Justice. I think this is what it was called. It was like
Oh,
super
I remember
sparkly.
Justice.
I think it used to be
Yeah.
called like Limited 2.
Limited 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Originally,
shit. Wow.
they did.
But I remember that being a thing, and just like little, I love stationery, like to this day I love stationery, and everybody had like mechanical pencils. I was a little thief, I'm not gonna lie. I jacked everybody's mechanical pencils. It's not even funny. I'm not even gonna front. Like, I was a thief. I'm sorry. I stole it from Walmart. I stole it from my peers,
As you
especially, but
should.
only from people who were mean to me. Like people who were my friends, I would just trade mechanical pencils with them. So I'd just have like a stash that I would just give to my friends. And we'd all just be like little misfits with our little stationery that we jacked from all the privileged little kids. Like, that was our thing. And but I was definitely the kid that made friends with like the bus driver and like the maintenance people and like
Oh, I relate to that.
yeah, I was best friends with like the librarian or like yeah. But for years I remember like my bus driver just started giving me candy and like reserving my favorite treats and stuff because I would ride the bus to school every day, that kind of thing. So I found comfort in like very specific people that like still stand out to this day. But as a whole, it was definitely very much kind of like an outcast experience and not by choice, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So
It's very alienating,
yeah.
and like you said, you don't understand that, when you're a little kid, when you're growing up, when you're just trying to go to school every day and, do your homework.
Right. Yeah, and then dealing with school on its own, that's a whole nightmare. Especially when my brother got diagnosed. Actually, I have a younger brother. He was diagnosed with high functioning autism, which means he can blend in enough, right?
Knows how to mask, basically.
Exactly. He figured out how to mask, and he's social. So it was actually, we had to teach him to not talk to people instead of just running up to anyone. He really had to learn stranger danger. But I kind of missed that because I'd had good grades. That was the difference between me and my brother. Like I survived in school enough to fly under the radar, but my behavior was still kind of like a low-key punished in microaggressive ways. By like my peers and teachers, and I remember like things would get pinned on me, like if something happened then I would be the scapegoat. I would get sent home with a note, that kind of thing, even though it was basically gaslighting. Like I basically got gaslit into believing I was the classroom issue. And I didn't feel like I could tell my parents because I was taught that teachers have the authority, right? So if she says I did something wrong, obviously something went wrong, right?
Right.
So and again, when you're going through it, you don't understand. So it wasn't until like I graduated that was like, oh, it was just kind of hits you. You're like, oh, that's a lot of just like subtle violence that just builds up over years, essentially. So it was just kind of like it was not understanding what was wrong with me and not understanding like why I was made to feel like it was like on me to fix, and
especially when you were doing things that are like completely and developmentally like normal kids.
Yeah,
that's just how kids
100%.
are. But if you are in our lovely American education system and you are a student of color, it's always assumed that somehow you should be in trouble. Yeah. I remember being in like staff meetings and having like the type of teacher I'm talking about being like, it's causing trouble, and we need to do like a family. We need that child's family to come in here, and I'm like, for what? Because they're having fun. Can you calm down? Like for what?
I actually saw this thing on Twitter that was like, kids are put in positions where they're forced to self-soothe before they know how to self-soothe. Like they developmentally cannot. So I was held to that standard of like, you need to handle your business at like 5 and 6, and I got the same treatment at home because my parents, they didn't have a guidebook. They as far as they were concerned, they already had an autistic son. then they had this daughter who was kind of doing okay. So I was kind of like a back burner. You know, if I messed up, it was just like, you're not trying hard enough, or you're lazy, or you like, because you've done it before, right? Why can't you do it now? And the difference is in elementary school and stuff, everything's highly regimented, and the teachers are always on my ass, especially. So I didn't really have an option to not like, and I was definitely a people pleaser, and like my validation came from like good grades. So when I came home with good grades, that's where I got the most like praise, and especially from my mother specifically. We'll get into that one. But that's how I like got attention, basically, was getting good grades. So I had a motivator to like do well. And my brother was like, I don't fucking care. That's literally the difference between me and my brother. And I think that's why he got a diagnosis, and it just like, she's not on the radar, but she's enough of an issue to be an issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was just, yeah, it was a lot. It was multi-layer things. I feel like I can't talk about being in a white neighborhood without touching on the neurodivergent side of things, and like also how my income played into things, because my grocery store was the food pantry, you know, stuff like that. So there was a lot of different factors contributing to like, you're different. You know what I mean?
There's the
Yeah, and
complexity.
please do. I mean, those issues all go hand in hand. You know, that's part of, that was your reality. That was how you grew up. You know, so of course
Yep.
they all play into one another. And I think that also speaks to, yeah, once again, our education system. Once again, how students of color are brushed aside for the most part, instead of, you know, given maybe the extra attention, the extra care they need to be more successful in that setting.
They're given too much attention in some ways, like
Right.
attention, bad,
Behavioral.
negative attention, but
Behavioral
then
attention.
simultaneously their needs are ignored, like all hand in hand, which
I
is
basically escaped to the library is where I spent most of my time, because just like nobody would perceive me there, and I could like, Percy Jackson was like my book series, and like I read Harry Potter too young, and I don't associate it with it now. I only mention it because that was one of the generational books, right? I read it too young to even grasp, but that was another thing. I was the type of neurodivergent kid that was like gifted, so I got placed in higher levels and stuff. So that's where the extra tension came into play, because I was like the one black girl in these gifted classes, and I said girl because I wasn't exploring gender then. I was just, you know, I was girl as far as I knew, and so there was like an extra microscope to like get this one kid to succeed. So I feel like there was extra like correctional things happening there. And so I was like expected to read this complicated shit that I didn't even really have the life experience to grasp the gravity of, but I could read it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it was a weird environment. Now that I think about it, like, why did I go through that?
It is a weird environment. And I mean, obviously that was when you were younger, but I don't know if you experienced this too. Like for me, I would also, you know, be in like the honors classes and, you know, get placed and given these opportunities. And there was like this extra expectation so they could have the minority student, you know, be part of this program and meet that diversity credit or whatever
Quota.
it was the school.
100%.
Yeah, quota. Thank you. And that's like added pressure that no student needs, I don't think.
Well, there was so much pressure to be the first and only when you're a minority, right? So you have all this extra stress that people just pin on you because you happen to get there first.
Right.
And it was just, I don't think I even registered the pressure at the time. I just figured, I think I shouldered it and like assumed that it was me just not trying hard. I just need to try hard. I just need to do this. I just need to do this, and I'll be fine. And then I hit high. I remember it was like middle school where it kind of started to drop off. When I got older and I like started to struggle with keeping up with school and stuff, because there was less structure. There's less and less structure. They support you less and less because you're supposed to be independent. You're supposed to be more and more of an adult, right? And then once I hit high school, I remember it was that moment. I was in an honors class and I was like, I can't do this. And I don't know why I can't do this, because I've never had that issue before. But because I never had the language or like anyone question if I was neurotypical or not, I don't think I really understood why, and I couldn't articulate why. So I couldn't articulate that I needed help without feeling like I was just failing somehow, you know?
Well, it doesn't help that the face of neurodivergency so often is like a small,
rambunctious
nerdy,
white
cishet white boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So none of your
not very relatable.
you know, as someone who obviously attended university for education and like experienced what that looks like, they're not teaching you to look out for that in other ways. There's only like one set of signals, and if you want to
Yeah.
learn to be a more like attuned educator, like you got to do that shit on your own.
Oh
Despite
yeah.
despite paying $67K a year to learn how to be a good educator, I gotta learn half this stuff on my own if I want to actually
Exactly.
support like all of my students, which is a mess.
School teaches you how to be a capitalistic robot, not an intelligent person, or an emotionally intelligent person, for that matter. You can be very book smart, but you can be very out of touch with people. You know, by the time you graduate, and still not have your shit together because you can't get an interview if you don't know how to talk to people. You know, there's so many layers, and that goes into accessibility and like so much stuff. Like school became very inaccessible to me, so I just hermited even more, even away from my parents, because I felt like, again, I didn't have the language to communicate to them that I was struggling. And by the time I was struggling so hard, I was basically failing. They were like, well, you aren't trying hard enough. I'm like, yes, but there's a why. And they couldn't understand that there's a why. I couldn't just do the thing. You know what I mean? And my stress response was shutting down and just stopping it altogether. I'm like, I can't handle this. I'm not. And then just assignments would build up and build up and build up and build up. And so here I am. I'm like, well, I'm not stupid. Obviously, I can handle myself in like real life situations, right? But as soon as I get to school, it was just like I walked. By the time I was in California. And let me back up. Hold on. I moved around a lot as a kid. So we moved about every 2 years in Texas. So I went to like 3 or 4 different schools, and then we moved to California because my dad got a job out there. The company isn't in good favor now, so I'm not going to say where, but it was in the gaming industry, right? And I grew up around gaming and stuff, and that's kind of how I ended up on Twitch later on. But we were in California at the time, so that's when I got the unicorn reaction. That's when I got it's a very Asian-dominated like area. I was in SoCal in Irvine, so there was a lot of like, I was expecting a bunch of white people, and it was actually a lot of Asian people. There's like a pho place every other corner. Like it's a very different vibe, which isn't a bad thing at all. But it was very much like, instead of like, it was very like an uppity, like, oh, you're interesting, you're an interesting specimen. You know what I mean? It was either like, oh my gosh, you're glorious, or like, ooh, that's an interesting new like bug. You know what I mean? It was, so there was that, and so there was like romantic things or just social things, right? Like I remember boys who were Asian who were like, I want to go out with you, I think you're really cool, but I can't bring you home because my parents don't like black people. So it was just stuff like that was just like, it was subtle, and then it got to a point where it was just like thrown in my face that like, you're black and that's a problem. Because even though I'm mixed, I'm still like a 60-40 split. I got a lot of white in here. I just don't like to talk about it. But
I feel that.
it's once you have a drop of black, you're black, right? So it's
That's right.
it was really weird, like coasting on like, you're acceptable enough to hang out behind closed doors, but other than that, like, stay away from me. You know what I mean? There was plenty of friendships that were like, I'll hang out with you because I have no one else to hang out with, and I like you and like being around you, but as soon as I get other friends, like, gone, you know? So there was just a lot of like, there's just a lot of like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And then I just stopped trying, you know? And then I got into like online stuff because, again, I grew up around gaming. Like, I grew up fishing for my dad in WoW. I grew up on Animal Crossing and Wii games, and like, I don't remember if you remember this, but we had a Z Smile, and I think that's what it was called, but it was like a little paw print controller, and then like, I always had video games basically, right? And so I was introduced to like Discord and stuff like really young, which we all know there's some sketchy shit on Discord. So seeking validation.
Being a teenager on the
Yeah.
internet in our childhood was interesting.
Yeah.
Sure, it's still interesting now, but
100%. But you don't know what you don't know when you're a kid, right?
Yeah.
But that leads into, you know, I didn't get validation in real life, and I was struggling in other areas, so I sought it elsewhere. And I discovered like I don't know how explicit I want to get here, but I discovered like not the most safe for work Discord servers, right? And it was slow. It started with Kick, actually. It
Oh,
started with
kick.
Kick and transitioned into Discord.
Oh,
So
gosh.
if you get what I'm, you know what I mean? So I had a friend, because it starts with a kid who knows too much, who tells you too much, and then you throw into the deep end, right? And
And it doesn't help too that like I feel like a lot of us who get into that sticky end of the internet were the kids who mostly hung out with adults and we knew how to talk in adult ways cuz I was
exactly.
like parentified really young because
Younger
like
brother.
I
Yep.
all of my friends were like all of the people I spoke to consistently on a daily basis were teachers, bus drivers, you know, and so I was talking like an adult and moving on the internet
Like an adult.
like an adult, but I was not an adult.
That's exactly the problem I ran into. You hit it right on the head. Like, I was so used to seeking out adult conversations because I could keep up with them on some level, and like by the time I talked to kids, they were just like, "Yo, you're stinky. Get away
You
from
don't
me."
want to talk to the asshole kids,
It's
so of
kind
course
of
you talk to
why
adults.
that's kind of why I hate when folks are like, "Oh, like your kid is so wise." Like that's not a good thing.
Not a compliment.
It
That's
means that your
trauma.
I was called an
child
old soul growing up.
Yes. Somebody told me if you've ever been called an old soul, that means you lost your serotonin by the time you were 12. And I was like,
It's
that.
It's
That. Because like what it signifies is actually that your child is developmentally like they've been introduced to
ahead.
topics they should not have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
and been asked to
Too much
engage in the
information.
world in a way that's too advanced for their age.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I ended up in situations where I didn't understand the gravity of it, but I understood the definition of it. You know what I mean? So it was very much like it was a very childlike seeking of validation. Like, I want you to think I'm pretty and attractive and want to talk to me, but it was also talking to an adult who had very different intentions. You know what I mean? It was very much like, oh, someone easily to manipulate, because they'll tell you that. They'll tell you, oh, you're so mature, you have an old soul, like, I love talking to you, I don't like talking to people my age, like, you're so special, right? And they make you feel special.
And you haven't felt special in so many other ways in life. So it's
So
like
I stuck to it. And that was the thing that got me in trouble, like in like deep shit with my parents, because I would just keep going back to it. Like, if I got caught, you know, doing spicy things with people I shouldn't be doing spicy things with, and like talking to them in ways that are very like, because they'd want me to talk to them like a child and like call them daddy or engage with them in very like simultaneously adult and very like childlike ways. So, you know, my parents would stumble across that eventually, as they do, because they were younger and they were tech savvy enough to be like, wait a minute. But
what are you doing?
exactly. So they found it all, and it was definitely met with, and then again, when I talk about my parents' reaction, I'm not trying to say like they're the reason for all my problems, but they definitely contributed to some things later on, right? Because you know, how the fuck do you raise a kid on the internet, right? Like, they have access to so much information.
That thought crosses my mind probably once a day, like about the future of potentially having a child and what the fuck that looks like on the internet, especially today, because I feel like back then there was still, at least from some families, there was still an attempt of like, oh, my kid's not going to have a phone till they're 13.
Yeah,
my kid's not going to have a phone till they're 16. That has gone out the window. Like, kids are playing with phones when they're like 6.
3.
They're more put together than I am right now. Honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I
For real.
have nieces and nephews who like can operate their phone, like their parents' phones, and like they can barely talk. Like, I don't.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. I'm scared for them on some level. I feel like they'll be really well equipped for some things, but it's definitely going to come with some developmental drawbacks, I think, because it definitely hit me hard, and that's just coming from like, you know, a marginalized girl. Can you imagine like if I was a little rich white girl and I had access to an iPhone when I was like 9? Like, I didn't have like a smartphone until I was like 12. I had like I had a Nokia, and then I had like a flip phone, and then I had a smartphone. And I didn't get my first iPhone until like 14, maybe a little, or 13, 14. Yeah, definitely 13, 12 or 13. But it was like that. It was like, I wonder how much would have been delayed had I not had access to all that. You know what I mean? because basically you're just forced to be like, well, what is sex? What is this? What are all these things? And you can just look it up. Like,
Yeah. And like you're getting, I think those questions are normal, but you're supposed to have an adult in your life
you're
who's,
supposed to have a buffer.
yeah, who's curating how you're getting that information and how
Yeah.
much, right?
So
If your child's old enough to ask the question, like you need to teach them because they're curious, but like there are words and choices about how much and how you frame it
exactly.
that aren't being made when someone just has access to Google.
Right. So, and because of like not feeling validated when I did come to my parents like about like how I was struggling and things, I just didn't talk to them about it or anything because I didn't think they'd get it, right? And which is normal, but it was also just, very specific. And I think being Black too, there's a lot of mental health stigma there as well. Like even now, like dealing with my brother who is an adult now, he just turned 18, graduated, did all that stuff, and he's not with me right now. He's in California with my dad, but just like the stigma around struggling because we have to be strong, not because we are strong, but we have to be. Like you have to. Like you can't. When I say strength, I don't mean like hard. You just have to like learn to deal with some things and put up with some things, and like you just build a tolerance for certain levels of treatment. So things that are racist, like that are microaggressions, usually don't even like pick up on my radar unless they're like super pointed because I'm used to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that all goes back to like fetishization. I kind of touched on it when people were like, oh, people are fascinated with you. So I got into that kind of stuff. So it started with first it started with kids, and then it started with like slightly older boys in high school who were kind of getting into that, right? And then it developed into actual grown men, and like then they're like, oh, let's all move to Discord. And then this is all while I'm getting like caught here and there and like having my phone and stuff taken away. And so I'd be isolated from, well, I felt like I was very isolated. I got all my technology taken away to have access to things. Like that's how they handled it. So my parents handled it. More specifically, my mom. My dad was always the balance between the two of them, but he can only calm her down so much, right? So it was very much like, you're disgusting, stop being a whore, like just like get your shit together, basically. Come from energy from my mom. She did not call me a whore, obviously, but she was, but like that was basically saying that without saying that. You know what I mean? It was definitely met with like a lot of like shaming and like, what the fuck is wrong with you? So I just added to the already existing feeling of like, there's something wrong with me, right? And so I was isolated, and so I'd go back to it because that's where I got my validation, right? And I didn't have like, it wasn't coming from myself, so I felt like I needed to get it from something else. And so for years I would just like seek out these like environments where I felt like I could get attention, and like join these servers where like I could have a bunch of people going after me, right? Which in my mind was great. It was kind of like, oh, it's just another creepy guy, but it was also kind of like, I'm gonna play. It was like a game still. It was still very much through the lens of a kid, because I was a kid. Like fuck, it was just. And then I had real boys who weren't on the level that the men I was talking to were, so I didn't feel like I could talk to just regular boys my age, right, at that point, because I'd already been exposed to adult land. And so here I was, a kid trying to be in adult land without the like experience in between to like actually protect myself in adult land, because adult land is fine if you know what you're doing, right? Because all of those things, sex, those relationships, those can be healthy and fine. The problem is I didn't have that information or experience, so I was just like, I'm here. Do what you want, essentially. Like it was very dangerous, and I understand my parents' frustration. I do, because how the fuck do you deal with that, right? So it was just, so there was tension at home in that regard, right? Because they were like, what do we do? And I'm just like, fuck you, I'm gonna go. They care about me, right? But they didn't. And so there was tension there for a few years, and I was very much like dishonest about it. I hid things from them. Like I just retreated more and more away from my support system because I didn't feel like they were going to support me. But all of that, I mean, there's a lot there, but that's basically that in a nutshell. That was the majority of like, I'd say like my middle school to high school years, and that all of that contributed to like my self-image and self-worth, right? And that's how we get into like being exposed to media and things means I got exposed to a certain body type and certain aesthetic and certain, environments, right? So I strove to be those things because I figured I would get more validation if I become this. And then growing up around predominantly white people, all my beauty standards were white girls growing up, and like what that looked like. I didn't know what it looked like to grow up. Like my parents did a good job exposing me to Black beauty, but they were all like, it wasn't relatable to me because I was still a kid, right? Well, they're already adults; they're already here. You know what I mean? How do I get from here to here? And so it was like, okay, that exists, but it doesn't apply to me, right? So that kind of led into feeling like I needed to lose weight or be more sexual, have bigger boobs, bigger butt, slim waist. Not even that, just be like tiny, be as tiny and docile and like there was a lot of things because I thought that if I looked a certain way that it would fix all my problems, right? Because the step it would take to get there would mean that like, oh, I would be studious and then I would, drink black coffee in the morning, and like I got into the romanticized world of like body image and things, and it became like seeking out this version of me I felt I couldn't do. So here I was, this neurodivergent, normal ass kid who has fat in weird places because I'm still developing, right? And I picked that shit apart. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm not an adult yet. Why am I shaped like this? Why can't I be like this? Why can't I just study? Why can't I just do this? And all that frustration just kind of came out and developed into like self-harm in a way. And it quickly became trying to lose a couple pounds into changing the way I eat, to just not eating, to just like trying to shrink myself, because it wasn't just physically shrinking, I was shrinking me, right? I was trying to take up as little space as possible, in multiple fronts, I think. And that's why it was in disordered land and not just regular, oh, I'm just trying to lose a couple pounds, right? And that started, I wanted to start seriously losing weight when I was about 16. And of course, I get comments from home. That's another thing in the Black community. It's either, oh, honey, are you sure you want to eat that? Or here, have another plate. There's no in between, right? Your body is always the topic of conversation at family events, right? And it would mostly, I'm just going to be honest, it would mostly come from my mom. There was a lot of projected insecurity coming from her too. My dad was very much, I just think he didn't know what to say, because he's a guy. He can't relate to some things.
So he just said nothing, do you think?
I think he would try to say things and I would take them the wrong way.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like I would want, more food, and he'd be like, because he was bigger. Both my parents like were bigger, and then they lost a lot of weight. And so I was exposed to that too. Like I'm like, oh, this is healthy, and then it became unhealthy, right?
Yeah.
So he was bigger. He's like, look, just from a health perspective, I just don't want you to get, it was very much just like, hey, I just don't want you to be in my situation because it's not easy, because it has had medical impacts for him,
Yeah.
And
but you were a kid.
Right. So
that's like too much for you to understand, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So I took it as, I'm getting fat. That's bad. And I associated bad with fatness, even though those two things are not.
Yeah, but you couldn't have known that as a kid.
Exactly. I couldn't separate the two. I was being told that these things are bad. This leads to bad things. So don't be that thing. And then I got equally unhealthy, just on the opposite scale.
Yeah.
And so,
don't forget to breathe, my love.
Please.
No,
I know.
You're fine.
My brain
I love it. No, you're incredible. To take care of yourself, don't forget to breathe.
Sorry. And my partner had to tell me the same thing. Like when I was streaming, he'd be like, "Baby, breathe." Like in my DMs. I'm like, "Oh yeah, breathing."
Breathing is something that we should do.
That I have to do.
Right. Exactly. Hold on. There's so many layers that it's really hard to tell it in a linear way, because there's so many things stacked on top of one another.
Your storytelling, can I just take a second and you can breathe? Well, I just say your storytelling ability is like absolutely fascinating in the sense that like I think to my like, because we're hosting a show, so my gut is to like have a question ready if you like need something, and you will literally like answer the question that I was going to ask without me ever. I was like, oh, okay, we're there.
You got
Okay,
Yeah.
that's where we're. Yep, got it. Yep, great. Go.
Look, I'm good at segues. I'm shit at writing essays in an academic world, but I know how to tell a
Uh,
story. That's for sure.
oh my gosh.
So that was weird too. That disconnect. Like I could recount my life story and people could keep up with it in a conversation, but I couldn't write an essay. You know what I mean?
That's probably just your teachers being shit, if we're being
Oh
completely
yeah.
honest.
There's that, because you have to write it a very specific way. So the thing was, I was trying to force my natural way of thinking into a very like rigid one. Like this is the one way to do it well.
This is what I would always tell my students, like, don't edit while you write. Don't edit while you write, because
Just right.
you are crushing any creativity you have by doing that. And the American education system is terrible for that, like telling you to edit your work as you're writing, and you can't get a single thought out. I had a pal who was trying to get into med school, and was having crushing anxiety about like the writing components of it, and I was like, just fucking write, love. Like, it's because you're trying to make it perfect at two people's standards while you're writing, and you're like losing any flow that you might have.
Yeah, my best essays were the ones I did like 2 hours before they were due, and I could just push them out.
And that's why, because you didn't have, exactly.
Time to edit it. But honestly, that applies. Literally, that tweet like changed my life, low-key. Just you saying that, because even like when I type, I check myself constantly. I'm constantly like feeling the need to apologize for typos, because like my mode of communication is talking. Like that's the easiest thing, but I live in a digital world, so I've also learned to like type, right? So, but there's there's a big brain and hand disconnect. So I'll have a full ass thought already, like, and I'm already like 2 paragraphs in, and my hands are still on the first sentence, right? And so much stuff gets like lost in that communication as well,
in the translation, as well as people's like interpretation too, because people
there's no tone indicator. For sure. That's a big thing I ran into. And then I didn't realize this was a neurodivergence thing until, obviously, okay, I didn't get into like understanding my neurodivergence until I like really got into streaming and met more people who are neurodivergent in the streaming world. And that's when I was like, oh, this is me. This is awesome.
That's a thing.
This is awesome. Me. I was like, oh shit. And then you get into the intersectionality of it. And I'm like, that's a very different experience than my experience, because there's still like a level of privilege that they had that I didn't have. You know what I mean? And I kind of forgot where I paused a little bit there. I was talking about my eating disorder, and then it kind of transitioned. Okay, yeah. So here I am, quickly approaching like 100 pounds. And I, just for reference, I'm not gonna like list my weight or anything. Like, well, just that for context, purely contextual. I don't mean to trigger anyone. This is just kind of what happened, right? So for context, I'm like 5'7". I should be, in the like, well, I wouldn't say should be. I should be wherever I need to be for my health, right? But BMI wise, I was severely like underweight. You know what I mean? By like medical standards. I say that all in quotations because it's severely outdated, and that's a whole other thing.
We got you. Don't worry. We know what you're trying to communicate something through the frame of the lens that like we as a society talk about it, while simultaneously recognizing like those are not correct.
Those things are bad. Those things are bad. Well, not bad. They're just unhealthy. They're equally unhealthy, because I was measuring myself with numbers instead of measuring my worth as a person through like my character, right? So I was quickly approaching like 100 pounds, and I was struggling in school, and I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone. I didn't really feel like I could do anything. I was very much in a place where like, it's not going to get better. Like, I'm probably going to die by 17 of like heart failure or like falling in the street, because I would pass out, right? It was definitely like, so there was the stress of going to school. So I like slept a lot. I didn't want to go. I got to a point where like senior year, I was showing up like 2 hours late to school, and I would like stop at Starbucks on the way. And it got to a point where I couldn't bike to school anymore. Like, we had always like walked or bike. And because you get to a point where it's basically like it's opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like my heart was basically starting to fail. Like
You didn't have any
like
stamina left.
so I couldn't work out anymore. Like I got into the point where I couldn't fast very long and I couldn't work out because I didn't have enough on me to burn, right? So my like body was in self-preservation mode, and here I am just trying to like get through high school. And all the while I'm like my parents like mediator. So like at home, for home life context, right? Like I already had a rocky relationship with my parents, and it had just started to get better like right at 17, 18, like right when I became an adult, right? And I turned 18 before I graduated because I had a late birthday. I have an October birthday, right? So
Wait, you
it
have
was
a
like
what birthday? Just so I could write that down.
my birthday is in October.
Okay.
I'm a Libra baby. But so I had a later birthday. So when you go to school, like you're like the kids that are a year older, essentially, right? So while that was happening, like I turned 18, and then there was already months of like conflict between my parents that like I kind of overheard, but I wasn't really in it until like that point because and then my dad moved out. So my dad moved out, and I got closer with him because he couldn't talk to my mom, but he could talk to me. And so I was kind of the bridge of communication between them two for like
Which is
a year.
hard.
Yeah.
Been
so
there,
it was
done that, sending you love.
So my mom is similar to me, and her trauma response is like shutting down. So she locked herself away and kind of tapped out of being a mom for like 2 years essentially. And I couldn't connect with her, and so I got closer with my dad, and I wasn't making any progress with my mom right when I was like just starting to get better with both of them. So I felt like I kind of lost a parent in that time. And all of this, I'm still very physically unwell, but they had their own shit going on. You know, they also had another kid, and I just kind of was like shouldering everything. I feel like I was like, it's fine. They don't have time to worry about me, so I'm just gonna handle it, right? And I think my wake up moment was I was going down the stairs, and I already was about to fall down them. Like I literally for a moment I had to stop because I couldn't see. Like I could not see for like a whole 30 seconds. And then I had to like go down the rest of the stairs. And I was like, and this was after a few days of not eating, right? And so I went to make some oatmeal. I was like, look, and it was really fucked. Another trigger warning because I'm going to mention specifics. But it was really fucked because I remember being mad at myself for not making it the full time I wanted to fast. I was like 4 hours off, right? And I remember that being my concern. And then it struck me. I was like, why am I more mad about like the time of not nourishing myself versus the fact that I couldn't see for 30 seconds? Like it was that level of like warped perception at that point, right? And so I went to have some oatmeal, and of course you can't just have like full on food after not eating for a while, right? And I rejected it. I threw it up. And I didn't have the kind of eating disorder where I binged and threw up. I didn't have bulimia. So that like was a wake up call for me. I'm like, it's gotten to the point where I literally cannot eat food if I want to because of how I'm treating my body. And that was kind of like that was the specific moment where I was like, ooh, this is bad. this has gotten out of hand, right? And that was right before, again, like I turned like 18 in October, so that was like right before the holiday season, which I was already dreading because that centers around food, right? Like everything about my life revolved around like validation, food, and like balancing my home life, essentially balancing all these personalities. So, and like essentially just neglecting myself. So, you know, I basically started with trying to recover while all of this was going on, and I basically just started like eating breakfast every day. Like it was little things like that. I started to get better, right? I started eating breakfast every day. Started talking to my dad more. We were getting really close. My mom started kind of coming out of her, I would say, I don't really know if I'd describe it as a depressive episode. She had a lot going on emotionally. So she kind of started to peek out of that a little bit and started to step up more and back into her regular routine. But I would say by the time I graduated, I had gained maybe, I was definitely like healthier looking. I was still really small, but I definitely was like in a slightly better place. Like I wouldn't be opposed to eating at that point. So graduated. My parents were still, yeah. So basically, for the last, I'd say 3 years, I haven't lived with my dad. They have been like completely separated, and they actually just finalized their divorce like last week. um, and I'm not trying to like put all their business out there, but like it's important is to like
That's your
Of
story too.
course. Yeah,
That's your
that is your
story
story.
too.
Yeah. So all of that's going on. I'd say this is probably like the most unhealthy physically and mentally I was. Like I'd say like 16 to 18 was like right when I was like, I'm not gonna make it. I might not make it, you know. And I was kind of like, I didn't care. I put myself in very like dangerous situations with guys and things. So that kind of transitions into this. So I'm starting to try and recover. I graduated, and then after I got out of high school is when I started exploring like real life relationships, right? And I'd gotten like I had a phone at this point. Like my parents were like, once you're 18, like we're not gonna overhead that stuff. You have your phone. Like I had access to everything again. Like everything was kind of calm in that regard. And I wasn't necessarily like I still had remnants of that kind of online behavior, but like it wasn't full on anymore, right? So I started talking to people again. I got on Tinder. I was on Tinder a little bit in high school too, because after I turned 18, I was like, it's legal, it's fine. And so I'd go out on like little dates here and there, and that kind of thing. There were still older guys, like college age, you know. And so some stuff happened with that. Like, it was interesting. So like, I ended up making a best friend through Tinder. So I had this one guy that I would just like hang out with,
When
but I
Tinder
never did
actually
anything with.
makes friendships.
Exactly. But it was kind of like a temporary. It was one of those temporary connections where it was like we happened to be. He was there for a job, and then he was like moving in a year, right? And so he was just kind of like my buddy, and then but I never did anything with him. He was like, yeah, I never could. He was just like the one person I was like, you're not ugly. I just, nah. You know? Yeah. So I started exploring that, and the only reason I mention any of this is because that kind of this I'm not going to get too detailed with this, but it led to some sexual assault, basically. So my first real life boyfriend that happened because I went to him after what happened, because basically after it happened I didn't leave my room for like 3 days, and my mom could tell something was up. She knew about the date, and like that came home really late, and that's all she knew. She like something happened, right? And then by the time I emerged, she basically was just kind of like, oh, I've kind of been in similar situations, but there was no guidance to how to deal with that or like validation of what happened, you know what I mean? I was like, it feels like this. And she's like, it wasn't the definition of violent, you know, when you're taught what it is. You're like, you have an image in your mind of how it's supposed to go, and it didn't happen that way, but it felt that way.
A lot of our parents didn't have that same definition of like a enthusiast. Like if it's not an enthusiastic yes, then
yeah,
right.
It was very much. I had no intention. I made it very clear. No. It was a wear down situation. It was like, we're out here. I'm 20 minutes away from home. I'm in heels. I want to go home. Let's get it over with.
Yeah. It's like that's not a yes. That's a like I've succumbed to your pressure. Yeah.
And there's so much. I mean, I wouldn't even call it gray area when it comes to this, but like really anything that's truly not an enthusiastic yes is a no. You know?
Period. But I didn't know that. So it was.
And I don't think that was the conception of sexual assault when our parents were.
Oh, absolutely
not. So she basically said, "Oh, that's happened to me too," but she didn't really like. It just kind of got brushed off. So I was like, "Well, I need to talk to someone about this because
it's a lot."
So I went to him. I went to a friend from high school who, ironically, was also like in the Kick world and Discord world, right? But we never like. We always kind of like low-key flirted, but never really got together. It was always kind of like not the right time, different people, that type of thing. They were in a relationship, that kind of thing. And then I remember his response being, well, if you had just waited, I would have asked you out.
Wow.
Why are men?
Yeah. And so I still wasn't in the most healthy place. I was just starting to like repair that. I was like, I kind of, and somehow we ended up together. It was a very convenient relationship. We lived literally like in this like apartments next to each other. So he was in an apartment complex and I was in like the townhouse complex right next to each other. And so it was just kind of a convenient relationship. I just wanted like company. I didn't want to be alone. I think is what that relationship was. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts, basically. So I just hung out with him. And he was going through his own shit and he wasn't like a good partner. But he was also so it's weird because he was my first, and then that night happened because we weren't together when that happened, and then that night happened, and then we got together and then did more, right? So he was what I knew, right? He wasn't someone I would say I loved. He was honestly just a matter of convenience.
Familiar.
Well, and that's hard when you're first starting exploring relationships. You don't know anything else. That is just what, that's like your baseline.
Yeah, why do men? Exactly. But, my standards were already on the floor when it came to like men, you know what I mean? So I was like,
well, and you know, because of how everything had played out, when you don't have your own sense of self-worth, how are you going to expect somebody else to?
Yeah.
Right. And when you grow up like being treated like, other and everything, when someone shows you basic human decency, it's like, wow, this is the nicest person I've ever met.
Right. You're a god to me now, and then you attach yourselves to them.
Even if they're negative in other ways.
Yeah. And, I just want to say real quick that like I share all this stuff and I'm in a place where I can talk about it because I don't look at it with shame. I look at it as a point of growth and things that are really important to my story and who I am now. Yeah. So I don't want anyone to like hear any of this and be like, oh, I feel so bad for you. Don't. I'm who I am because of those things. Do I wish I had to go through those things to learn what I didn't know? But I learned all the same. That's important because there are people in my life who go through things and don't learn from them. So that being like just knowing that I've grown from those things is an accomplishment for me. So just want to preface that.
So, proud of.
Yeah. I don't look at these things with shame. I don't blame myself for them anymore. Because that was a big thing. I just remember feeling like, oh, coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? Could have done this, that kind of thing. And I actually had a good I only bring this up because I actually had a good moment with my dad yesterday. I didn't talk about this stuff with him, but I basically kind of alluded to something had happened and he was like, look, if you need to talk to me, I'm here. He didn't like pressure me to say anything because I was already kind of like but it was nice to be like, I could talk to you,
the space was created.
Yeah, exactly. Because my dad isn't perfect. He's a little old-fashioned in some regards, but he's always been willing to listen. He's always been willing to try and learn and try and understand, and that has been like the big difference between why I got close with my dad, not my mom, because he came into it without biases. Like if he had biases, he would remove them from that conversation so he could hear me. So I had that bit of safety for a bit, but I still didn't trust that entirely when all of that was happening. So I don't even remember how that ended. I think I was just like, no, this isn't good for me anymore. Like, you're not in a good place. He wasn't in a good place. Like, his house was dirty. And like, yeah, he wasn't in a good place. I was in a good place. And I was like, you know what? I need to go like take care of myself. Because what happened, it was really weird. So we had our first time, right? That was my first time with him. And then he confessed his love, which I don't think was love. I think it was just, you're here, And I basically was like, I'm not looking for commitment because I have, I was like, I'm just exploring things. I just stepped into this world. I'm like, look, wait. And we didn't talk for 2 months. And that's when that space for other people to step in came in. So I just wanted to explain that because I realized I didn't explain why we weren't talking. But so that happened. We parted ways. I still had all that trauma. No, that's what happened. Something happened again. It didn't get as far as the first time, but it was still dangerous. It was definitely got rough for a second, and I basically had to be nice to get out of the situation. You know what I mean? It got like, I wasn't wearing a bra, right? So I went, okay, let me back up. So, the night before I was going to break up with my convenience guy, is what I'm going to call him, is I was sharing why I was unhappy or why I didn't feel validated. I basically just felt like I was there and I didn't bring any value to him, or he didn't really want me around, right? And so I was venting to this other guy. I was still in the Discord world at this time, and I completely left it after this. But there was this guy who was local, and we ended up basically hanging out. He was like 20 minutes away, so he came pick me up, and it was like the dead of night. Obviously, already a bad situation. I snuck out, and the plan was we're gonna watch American Horror Story. And I say like halfway about the first into the first episode, I'm like in his house, right, that he shares with other people. So I wasn't completely alone. There was dogs and like other people. But it was basically just us up, and I was wearing bra, and he took that as an invitation, and I basically had to like kind of like wiggle my way out of the situation, be like, no, I didn't come here for that, because I was literally just lonely. I wanted to hang out with someone. That's always the fucked up thing, because my intentions are always like, I just want validation, I just want someone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just take advantage of that situation. So that happened. I basically had to like laugh about it in the moment so I could get a ride home. You know what I mean? Because we're 20 minutes away. I couldn't afford an Uber. I wasn't making money yet. So I got home and I came inside and I was like, that was too all basically. I'm like, that was not fun. And it was in the middle of I almost wish I got caught so I could like cry with my mom. You know what I mean? But she's not the one who was holding space for me. My dad was, and he was somewhere else, right? And so that was a thing that just never got addressed. It was just kind of there, and then I just kind of left that world entirely, and I was like, this is fuck. Never had good experience here. And so that I haven't been intimate with anyone since then. It's been a few years, but that's partially, it's by choice. It's partially trauma. It's partially just like I need to repair some things before I can go into this again. Because I was still recovering from eating disorder. I still recover every day. It's a never-ending process. But
and then we were in a panini too, which hasn't
that
made
happened.
Dating or exploration easy.
Oh yeah, so that's not really much of an option anyway. It's not the same
Right.
environment by any means. But that all basically happened over the summer after I graduated. And then I started my first semester of college, which I was forced into because I wanted as much time off to like figure out what I wanted possible. I knew I barely graduated high school because what happened is I basically had my 2 classes that I like never showed up for. I had to do them all online in like 2 weeks. And I passed those because again, I'm not dumb. I just don't function in an academic environment very well. So I graduated, I got my degree, got that all over with. Yay, barely. But it was basically like, I'm not going to do well in this, and I didn't want my parents to wasting money, so there was financial pressure there. So I was there, but I didn't want to be there, but I felt like I had to try at least a little because I was being invested into, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pressure because both my parents didn't finish college, so there was like a lot of pressure to be like, go to college, be the one.
You were the first again.
Yeah. Exactly. And I didn't want it. I got to a point I didn't want the pressure, and when I tried to articulate that, it was just like, you need to. It was basically kind of guilt trippy because they're like, well, you live here for free and we're paying for it, so you should be grateful that you get to go. But I didn't want
an opportunity. Why aren't you happy that you have this opportunity?
Exactly. And like I'm like, you're right, but I'd rather there be room for someone else who wants that versus me who's taking. I just felt like I took up too much space, so I kind of went back into shrink mode. I was like, I don't want to be here. I just want to take as little space as possible. And so I failed like 3 out of 4 classes. Like I did not do well. And mostly writing, writing and math have always been like, I hate those. And because I can do math well up until you get into like theoretical stuff. I'm like, well, how does this apply to life? Like as soon as it loses a connection with like real life like usage, my brain's like, what's the point? You know? And it's really hard for me to kind of push through that. And then it was partially I just shut down. I just didn't try. It was partially just like, fuck this.
Well, you were once again being put in an environment that you didn't ask to be in, that wasn't very affirming to you in the way that your brain worked at all either. So it's just kind of like,
And you know how professors are. They're just like, look, I'm not going to make accommodations for you. And it was very hard to find professors or counselors or people that would even be willing to like even had the expertise to deal with that, you know. Um,
And you got that element of like college's peak, like no routine. Like
oh yeah,
you have to create your own
yeah, everything yourself.
structure, and you should know how to do all of this already.
Yeah, exactly. They were basically like, you're an adult now. You magically have all the tools to be an independent human. And it's like, oh, no, I don't.
Even though, like, yeah, so many of us are first gen, like, we have no reference point for what this is supposed to look like or what to do in these spaces.
And you know, I did the research, I did the bullet journaling, I did the things. But the problem with planning is that I would spend so much time planning that I would like use all my spoons planning and not executing.
Yep.
So it was just a constant
Big
cycle
fat
of like,
relate.
yeah,
make it all pretty, but then when it came down to like actually having the brain power to
do the thing. Because I was an art kid. I flourished in art class. That was my class, right? I of course I passed all my art classes in college, but but that's all I felt like I was good at. That's the only place I felt like I had value, you know. So I always had to have an art class. Like I didn't go into a semester without some sort of art class, even though I only needed one for a general like associates, right? It was just like that was like my compromise. I was like, if you're gonna make me go to college, I need a place where I can feel happy, right? So that was happening, and not too much trauma besides academic stress. I feel like so much of like the last few years is just like trauma, and then like mild trauma in comparison.
But probably a lot of I don't know if it was like this for you, but like there was a point where there was no longer active trauma, but my brain was also then trying to process all the shit I had never had time to process before, which is a lot.
The repressed trauma.
Yeah. She's sometimes even more like she's even more hard sometimes because you feel like shit, but you can't pinpoint what like people be like, oh, like what happened, and you're like, oh, nothing, but like so much, but also nothing,
so much,
like everything, but like
everything
nothing.
and nothing. Because again, here we are, what, like an hour in, and I've just now you have context to why I was in that state, right? But it's hard to explain that in a few words of like, and so you know, you do the self-deprecating humor thing, and you're like, trauma.
Yeah, well, and it makes it hard to make, I don't know if it's just me, but like it makes it really hard to make relationships and friendships because you feel like they have to have all of that to understand how you operate into the world, and that is such a commitment and such an energy investment. And so often people will like fail the test of time of trying to like explain that to them, and then they act like shit, and you're like, do I even like want to put the spoons and energy into investing, retelling this narrative to somebody again?
Exactly. It's just a lot. And I want to just kind of like, my dad and my current partner are probably the biggest people that have even made it possible for me to sit here and do this, because they were kind of the first people to hold space for me to even like try and talk about what happened, you know? So meeting people like that slowly raised the standards of how I should be treating myself, because they never wavered in how they treated me, right? No matter, it wasn't conditional. So even if I fucked up, it wasn't like, I'm gonna punish you for not being the version of you that I want you to be. Because there was that too. So,
but that's not easy to find, you know.
Yeah,
it's not easy to find people that will have that patience and understanding and just
so much patience,
not needing to know everything, to just be okay to sit there and say, I'm listening, I'm just here with you, because sometimes that's what you need.
It's honestly, sometimes too, like when you have someone treat you so well for the first time, or like for one of the first times, it's really hard. I like get this bittersweet feeling whenever someone treats me the right way, because I'm like, it just kind of reminds me that of the last 23 years that
you weren't treated,
could have been how it was supposed to be. And it's like, oh fuck, like how would life look different?
The way I was just having this conversation with my partner, we were both talking about it. We were like, what if we grew up happy? Like, who would we be? Would we have even met, you know? Like,
it'd be a completely different life.
I think you retweeted it, but I saw that tweet that was like, people always say stupid shit like, um, diamonds are formed under pressure, but like, I'm not a diamond, I'm a human being, and I could have thrived and formed wonderfully
Yes.
with softness and gentleness and balance too.
Right.
So.
Sorry, laundry.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
You're good.
And that's my my verbal tick. If you can't tell, it's and so yeah, those are my two. And that's the big one. But yeah, so first semester of college and then second semester of college, pandemic hit, right? That was halfway through. That was when people started showing up with masks, kind of, sort of, and then suddenly we weren't in college. And so I was already struggling in physical college, and then we had to do everything online, which is like the epitome of independence, where you have to like do things, right? So that didn't work out well, obviously. And then we moved to Texas. We moved back to Texas, not by choice. Basically, what happened was my dad was locked in a lease in an apartment with not enough room for me and my brother, right? And my mom was moving because it's fucking expensive in California. I understand why.
Yes, it is.
And for context, I've shared this on Twitter, so I feel comfortable like sharing it here. But basically, when they separated, my dad was basically shouldering the brunt of both houses, both places. He was paying for everything: our car notes, our rent, our groceries, anything that we needed. Because as far as he is concerned, we're all a family unit, regardless of him and my mom being together. Also, thank you. So he was basically taking care of all of us for 2 years. So there was debt that came with that. So he wasn't really in a position to take us in, and my mom was, and that's just what it was at the end of the day. She had the room to take us to Texas, and he didn't. So we moved to Texas, and I hate Texas. Hate it here. Partially because of my childhood, I knew there's a bunch of white people who don't have the same political values, same values in general, different lifestyle, right? And we're also not close to the city where we are right now, so this is a lot of that. It's a lot of conservativeness in places that, there's nothing. Okay, let me preface this: there's being conservative, and then there's being a bigot, right? It's going to be conservative. You can believe what you believe in, but then there's being hateful, and there's a lot of that. And it's very passive aggressive out here. It's very passive aggressive, like, I'm not going to judge your lifestyle, but stay away from me, or I will shoot you. You know what I mean? It could go from 0 to 100 real quick. So I hate it here. So that added to stress as well. So I'm moving with the parent I don't have the greatest relationship with, and my buffer is gone, like completely gone at this point. My buffer has always been my dad between the two of us, right?
That's stressful.
Yeah. So, and my mom has a different partner, and he's kind of the new buffer, but he's a different person, right? He mixes into our family dynamic very differently. But it was enough. It was enough he's the little voice of like validation that's like, hey, they're fine. Get off their ass. You know what I mean? But he's definitely more like, because it's hard for him to walk into that situation too, because he didn't really know what he was getting into, because it all happened really fast. Yeah. So they were kind of together a few months, and now they're moving together into a new state, and she has kids, right? So we're adult kids, so it wasn't too hard. It's not like he had to do anything, but it's this meeting new people, it's living with different people, it's learning how to live with different people. So all of that was happening, and we were staying in my grandparents' house, because we're just literally right around the corner, and we were staying there, and that's a whole nother thing. But basically, things got a little tense because it was stressful financially. We're all kind of cramped into a tiny space together, out of necessity. And then we got into our place, and I had my room, and I had a space finally. But while that was happening, the period we were staying with my grandparents, like I had been making money on Twitch at this point, so like I was ordering out a lot and like basically isolating in my own way. I was still streaming, but it was like a dead spot internet wise, so like I had to stop streaming because like my stream would cut out like every 30 minutes. So it was like that feeling of isolation, because this has always been my escape. This has always been my space to like be a thing. By the way, I started streaming after I graduated high school, so it was at the end of 2019, December. I remember Christmas is when I got my streaming camera and microphone. It's the same one I'm using right now. And so all of that's happening while this is all happening, right? So Twitch streaming now, cool, professional, all that good stuff. So I had a little community, I had a little respite, and then that suddenly was like not happening, and then I was stuck in a small space with my family, right? And then so I was able to kind of reestablish myself, but the thing that happened with Twitch is like the more breaks I had to take, the more I like it was harder to get back into it every time. Like more stress and anxiety was attached to it every time I tried to get back into it. Just because there was a couple of reasons. There's a lot of privilege and things that thrives on Twitch. I was basically trying to find my place, right? And I realized the corner of the Twitch that we all hang out in is very different than Twitch as a whole.
Yeah.
So it was again that feeling of other, the feeling of being othered all over again, right? But in an online space. So I didn't quite fit in with the queer folks. I didn't quite fit in with like the wholesome streamer people, because I was basically like the land of toxic positivity.
Oh yes.
And so there was that wasn't, it looked nice, but it wasn't really what it was. And then there's
a lot of stress trying to navigate who's like
good,
who's actually, because there's a lot of presentation, right? And you get fooled.
A lot of performance.
It's a lot of performance, and you know, on the internet I feel like in person I have an incredibly good people reader. Like I just know right off the
100%.
get up, like
Yeah.
and I can't always explain it, but I just like I'm enough of an intuitive person that I'm like, those vibes not great.
And learned experience too, for sure.
Yeah, but on the internet, I feel like it's so much easier for folks to
get away with nasty
get
shit.
away with shit behind the scenes,
100%.
and that I think we've just seen that really brutally for the last like 3 months, like over and over and over again. It's always been happening.
Yeah, but it's just gotten to a point. It's like that's the pandemic, right? It's bringing attention to all of these things that already existed, but now it's such a pressure cooker of stress and things, and all of these like accessibility and like the state of the internet and like places where we have to exist now. We realize that there's problems with it. It's like being stuck in your house and realizing that you don't have a couch because you don't spend a lot of time there, so you don't think about it until you're stuck in it, right? And it's kind of like that on Twitch. It was like my home didn't have people in it, you know, that I felt at home with. And it took a long time, I would say. I'd say my first year with Twitch was kind of just me by myself. And I kind of, I got into Twitch because of Nisha Crossing, actually. I watched them on YouTube and then followed them over to Twitch. And then I exposed to that world right after I graduated, that type of thing. So I just like beeline for like Planet Me, basically. I molded my like branding and everything, like because it was me, but it was also like happened to be Planet Army, right? So I kind of took that, aligned myself with those values, which were my values, but I just like basically marketed myself towards that, right?
That was your dream.
Yeah. And then I got there and then I was like, oh, I don't relate to half of these people, because it's a massive team. And don't get me wrong, I talk about this stuff, and I'm not trying to shit on any particular team. I'm not trying to like put anyone on the team down. If you want to be on the team, absolutely do. It can be a very healthy environment. No toxic shit's happening there. I'll put it that way. But it was just from personal experience. It lacked that intersectionality. Basically, in a nutshell, my experience.
Which most teams do.
I mean, even now I'm on the leadership team, and it struck me the other day. I was like, I'm the one other Black person on the lead team. The one. And then here I am again, the one and only, or the one other, right? And that's kind of where it leads me to where I am now. I am, I have a partner. I'm here in not the best home environment, emotionally, which we can talk about that later. But kind of where I am now is like I feel like I'm floating on the internet right now. Like I know who I am and I don't know where my space is, but it's starting to get better because people like Queerly Me, I'm finding people like you guys who have similar upbringing, similar levels of there's depth to your experience, and you're very honest about it. And there's people like T, like I fucking love T, but just finding people like me who are neurodivergent and Black and disabled in some level, and they understand the layers without without you having to tell them. So there's that automatic space.
It comes a little bit more easily. Like, it's just in the small interactions, and you see it, and you're like, oh, that.
This is what healthy looks like.
That, yeah.
And it goes back to what you were saying, being like the processing trauma. I feel like the last couple months have been like escapism, and now I'm kind of getting to a point where now that I don't have my escapism, it's like I'm forced to kind of process a lot of the pandemic and everything happening as being like forced in a position where it's just me and processing things and realizing the gravity of what's happening. And that kind of, you guys follow me, well, I know Queer Loopy does, kind of follows me on Twitter and everything, and I'm only just now being able to articulate like my current living situation and how that's unhealthy, and just like now I have the language and the tools that I didn't have for years. I'm still learning, I'm not perfect, but now I'm in a position where I can kind of ask for help. But that goes into another thing, because existing on Twitch as an othered person, right, means that you automatically have to, it's like being Black, you have to be strong, you have to be exceptional in every avenue to get the bare minimum, essentially. So it's kind of hard asking for help, because I feel like I shouldn't have to bear my whole life story for people to care about my existence, because there are people that I know who don't need requirements to be cared about, you know what I mean? So it's bumping into that. It's like, how much is it worth it, you know what I mean? It's like, on one hand I do need help, but on the other I know I'm not, it can only go so far, right? Because
and we had the conversation the other day in the Discord and in the team Discord about how, like, no hate on them, but it is exhausting watching folks get to just vibe, play games, be pretty.
They get to just exist.
And they get all of the goods.
For just existing, and that's how it should be.
Right, like it's not about them, not upset with them, but it is hard to see that discrepancy.
Dynamic. Yeah.
And just how our society is set up in favor of, those people being able to exist that way.
Because at the core of it, there's nothing wrong with us. And I think that's kind of my whole underlying theme I'm trying to maintain here, is that there's never actually anything wrong with me, and it was everything wrong with the environment I was put in and how that contributed to making me feel like I wasn't a part of the overall like collective, right? So that's really kind of where I'm at. I'm realizing that I'm not the problem, and that it's okay to make my own space, right?
Yes.
It's okay to take up space. It's okay to talk about what happened to me, because it's what happened. I'm not casting blame on anyone. I'm not, name calling. I'm not. It's just it's
You're
what
just
it is.
Telling your story, and that's how you got to be where you are right now, sitting here having this conversation with us, and you, on top of that, like in addition to that, like you do deserve to be able to vibe and have your own space and be supported for who you are. And I know it's so hard to think that that's true, and I understand that feeling of like kind of floating and just like, oh, I don't fit in over here. I don't like the vibes over here. These people don't understand me, so the fact that, and I see it already, like you have your fan house and you have your art and you're figuring out how to curate your space for what you want it to be. Like, that's so powerful. And just know, like, you don't have to be in a hurry to figure that out. You're doing it already, and it's already forming and coming together. So just you're going in the right direction. 100%.
Don't do this to me.
Oh, I love that fan. It's very pretty. It's gorgeous.
I'd like to see it. Fuck. Emotions.
We talked about it with Blizz, but like, it's sometimes we feel like we're so dead set on the end goal, right? Like, where am I gonna land? What am I working towards? But like, remembering that like the main point of life is this middle part. where you're
Enjoy the
exploring,
journey.
you're figuring out what's working for you, the spaces that are serving you, the spaces that aren't serving you, and you're growing in.
Because I keep seeing this quote. Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
No, you go.
I keep seeing this quote that's like, you're where you wanted to be before, like, or something along those lines. Like, you were exactly where you were trying to be before. And like, and it kind of goes back to like, there was a point where I didn't even think I would make it to like 20. You know,
Yeah.
I'm turning 21 in October, and
Look at you.
and thank you. But it's kind of weird to be like, wow, like me a couple years ago didn't even think I would like be here. So that's a little weird too, because you don't have a plan. You're just kind of figuring shit out. You're like, I didn't know I was gonna be here, but we're doing it. Like, you know, it's. I mean, that's kind of dark, but it's true. I didn't plan for the future because I didn't think I had a future. You know.
Right.
Okay. Whew.
Yeah.
Let it out. Let it out. Let it out.
You should be super proud of yourself, and I'm really happy that you're here.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for just sharing, you know, all of your story, you know, all the parts that you decided to share with us of your story today. You know, thank you, and we're happy to hold that space for you, and know that there are so many other people out there that, you know, want to do the same and will support you for, you know, who you are and for your joy, you know, because that's really, really important. And that's something we like to focus on, is remembering, like, to celebrate your joy and know that you are not what has happened to you. You know, you are who you are and what you want to present to the world, you know.
Thank you for holding that space. And if it was anyone else, I wouldn't even have like touched on it. But like, you guys have created such a space where it's like, well, exactly what you said. You're like, there's space for your story, and I know that like, if I had me to like follow when I was online as a kid, it would have been very different. Like, you know, like even just branching into body positivity. I call it, well, body acceptance. You know, your body is allowed to just be whatever state it is. You don't have to love it all the time. I always hated that narrative that if you don't love yourself, no one can love you, because you don't love yourself all the time. But you're still worthy of love regardless. And I think that needs to be the message, right?
I agree.
In any regard, if you're disabled, if you're neurodivergent, if you're, you know, if your body's not where you want it to be, you don't need qualifiers to have value, is kind of what I've learned of all of this, right? If people need you to prove yourself to them, then you don't need to be around them, you know?
Right.
You never need to prove your worth as a person, because you're already here, you know? And nobody asked to be here, so we're all just here figuring it out on our little floating rock, you know. But yeah. But yeah. So many more questions. I've kind of like gotten through the meat and potatoes of
the meat and potatoes.
Where
I
we
love
got.
that.
It was magical.
It was a journey.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because I know we always like to, towards the end of the show, kind of ask something that like lets you talk about something that makes you happy, something that brings you joy. So whatever that is, whether that's art or cooking, or I know you have a multitude of different talents. So
Always branch into some shit.
What do you like to do outside of existing as a marginalized human in the world, which is hard?
That's the whole thing. Well, I mean, I look over and food, actually. It's weird. Being a chef is weird because like coming from an eating disorder to like cooking food is like, that's a big jump. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, I almost became a chef too. There was a moment where I almost went to culinary school when I was like a kid, because they would have like those charter schools or whatever. But so that's kind of surreal. It's kind of like, wow, I'm in an industry that I would have never dreamed that like I would exist in, because I had an unhealthy relationship with food. So that's fun. And okay, working in a kitchen is interesting because you cook a lot of the same thing, but when it's just me and cooking and figuring out, like, what drives me is like making food a happy thing, because I love food. It was never like I hated eating or food. It was just like I felt like I couldn't exist in the way that I wanted to exist, right? So now what drives me is like finding food that doesn't upset my body but tastes great. You know what I mean? And like listening to it. So there's that. And then there's I would consider myself, I don't know, there's weird connotations to it. I would consider myself like a witch, right? I have my plant parents. I'm a plant parent. I have my plant babies. Like I look over and that was the first thing I see. Like those, like that. It's like having breakfast every day. You wake up and I make sure I leave my window open for my plant babies before I leave for work, right? And I have my crystals next to them, and I have like Winnie the Pooh things and stuff like that. I like at the core of my being, I just like to create things, you know. So that can be food, that can be art, that can be singing, that can be like spicy stuff. Because a part of recovering is just like learning to perceive myself how I am and loving it, right? So creating spicy content's fun, just putting on makeup is fun, and just I'd say like in a nutshell, just creating and nurturing I've always been like the core of who I am. Like when I was a little girl, like that was what I did. I would go and hug trees and like pick flowers and give them to people. Like at the core of who I am, I've always loved like nature and soft things and like very much Ghibli-esque energy, you know, like
romanticizing your life a little bit.
I like the little things, you know, because when you think you're not going to be here, you like, that's all you have, the little things sometimes, you know. So just sitting in the sun and smoking weed, you know.
One of my favorite activities.
As you
should. Just like truly being alive in the moment is what I'm hearing, you know, and just like really relishing in like hearing your beating heart while feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin while absolutely vibing. And those little things should not be taken for granted, you know.
God, you can't. There's
Like,
so many little things, and that's what keeps me kind of like tethered. It's like, well, you know, the sky's really pretty today. I wouldn't be able to see it if I wasn't here, right? That kind of thing. I don't mean to like keep being emotional.
No, I love it.
Fine. You have such a beautiful spirit, and I am like just honored to share space with you, honestly.
Me too.
Swish.
Swish. I'm very soft. Hold on. This guy's gonna make you happy. Here we go. We have to have
look at the
Olive. Baby. This is Olive, my little happy octopus.
That's my cat's name. That's right here. Olive. Yeah.
I want a cat. I want a black cat so bad, just because like I know that they're basically like living crystals and they can like pick up when you're like not okay.
They are truly like otherworldly beings. Cats are not from Earth. I am very convinced
I'm
of
convinced
that.
They're aliens.
They are aliens.
They're not from this world.
I also thoroughly enjoy the fact that cats come up in every stream we have for whatever reason. I don't know, but cats make their way into every Humans of Twitch session somehow, some way.
Look, I'm like a cat myself. I enjoy sitting in patches of sun and getting ridiculously high. So there's that.
Also, I enjoy getting pet. Just saying.
Yes, I enjoy head pets. Oh God, if you want me to fall in love with you, rub my head.
Okay.
We've learned the secrets. And B's like, okay, I'm taking notes.
I'm serious.
They got out the notebook.
If we're gonna take notes, you know that if I cook you a meal, I love you. But if you cook me a meal, it doesn't even matter if it's good. I will be like on the floor crying.
Okay, hey, this isn't fair. You're not allowed to give me a list of things I can like. It's not gonna work out for us very well.
Look, soft, squishy things, weed, food, mostly bread and butter.
Sometimes
that's all you need.
I'm surprised you're not a bit of a. Do you have any Taurus in your chart somewhere?
Let me check. I might. I don't know.
The love for comfort, food, plants, the groundedness. I'm like
That's some earthy energy right there.
I have a fuck ton of air signs, actually, is the thing. That's where the daydreamer thing comes in.
Yeah, that's the mysticism.
So easily.
Yeah. I think that makes sense, though. Us earth and air signs tend to be very harmonious.
Yes. I have a whole No, hold on. Bear with me. I have a whole. I put it all down for this reason.
For when someone asks you.
Yeah.
I mean, as
Because
queers, we
I
do
know my
like to
full-
ask that.
We got to talk about
I
our
have to have it on
charts.
deck. I have to have it on deck. I have a lot of doubles actually. I have double Libra, double Sagittarius, double Scorpio, double
I met with a
Gemini, and
Scorpio.
double Aquarius, and then like that's of the main 12 signs. Is it 12?
Listen,
I'm bad at math.
I don't know. I know like the big three. I'm not well versed in.
Yeah, I actually don't have a drop of Taurus in my chart.
That's
Surprise.
surprising.
Not a single.
Oh, typo,
drop.
yes. 100%
gosh.
to it. To it.
Like, I
Yes,
need to
everyone,
read my signs.
look
Oh
up
my
your
God.
birth chart. It's good to know.
It's
I
fun.
would recommend.
Even if you like don't
Yeah.
believe in it, I think it's a fun way to instigate some self-reflection.
It is. I always tell people it's
Good
just more
icebreaker,
like a reference guide more than anything else, just to be able to look internally and say like, oh, maybe I do exhibit that behavior sometimes, or like, no, I'm very much not like that part
I
of
like to
me.
think of astrology as how you are already set up to absorb your experiences. It's not who you are, but how
Mhm.
you're going to move is
Yeah.
more how I think about astrology, because ultimately your experiences shape who you are, but how you receive those experiences, that's where I think your star sign comes into play.
Love that.
So that's how I think about it. But I have a very like abundance mentality with that kind of thing. I don't a lot of like spirituality and like on that part of the internet too is very like whitewashed and very much like MLMs and like very much colonizing spirituality at its core, right? Because at the end of the day, I only throw this out there because I know people are interested in this kind of thing. At the end of the day, you don't need a damn thing. You need you and your mind. That's it. And a patch of sun.
That's right.
those are ideal location. But if you're thinking about getting into it, it's a lot of what B said. It's a lot of just self-reflection, I think.
Yeah,
for sure. Because once you are like comfortable with yourself, you have more energy to direct towards manifesting and like towards things that you want to pursue, and grow. So I definitely, a lot of people like to skip over the hard stuff in spirituality, which kind of is attached to my story as well, because they don't do the healing, they don't do the processing, they want to go straight to the crystals and the fun stuff, and it's like you can't appreciate the full benefits of something you're not ready to receive yet, because you're not in a place where you yourself even know what your own energy feels like,
That's right.
And I think once you know exactly who you are in your energy, and then you can get into that.
Yeah, and it'll give you a wake-up call sometimes too, because like with the full moon last night, I was like, oh, I'm gonna journal, I'm gonna put my crystals out, I'm gonna like be so productive. And then I like laid down for a minute and I was like, I gotta just vibe, I gotta just sit here and think about life, and that's what I'm gonna do tonight, because that's what's best gonna serve me.
Exactly. There's so much like to-do list and capitalism that's dripped into that too. I notice there's so much like, oh, you have to be the epitome of production in the full moon.
You don't have to call me out like this, actually.
Literally, on the full moon, all I do is get high and stare at it. I'm like, you're fucking beautiful. I'm gonna vibe with you for a bit.
That's exactly what I did last night, and I woke up this morning and I'm like, that's what I needed. I feel so much better. Like sometimes you just gotta vibe.
Yeah. Don't ever force yourself to be productive, honestly,
It's
because we live in a world where your production equals your value, and that is not the case.
Right.
So, and this outside of spirituality, like I said, I don't like to call it spirituality because it's just not how I think. It's not really like attached to anything in particular. It's just like existing. But literally, don't ever feel the need to do something to feel like you're spiritual enough or enough for anything. Like that goes into everything,
Yeah.
But there's no, like, again, you don't have to go proving that you're a thing. You're already a thing if you decide to be the thing, So, yeah.
This is great advice.
We're getting all this advice from you today.
This is free, y'all. This 2 hours is free, but after this, please go check out Fan House and whatever else. I don't know what other links we're gonna have up. Twitter.
Twitter and Fan House are where I exist primarily. Yeah.
Get more of this outside of this. The first 2 hours are free, y'all. Okay.
It was like a free little
free
like
trial.
free trial. Now
Yeah.
go love them all of
Yeah.
the time.
Go support them all the time.
Making this space for me though. Thank you so much. I know it was
I
like a
know,
last
like
minute thing.
I said
but
this already, but you see that art on the other side of my screen?
Look
They
at
are
that art.
very talented, and we can have that conversation later about undervaluing yourself. But those sketches are only $15 on their fan house, which is ridiculous.
People already subscribe. I'm not trying to put everything behind a huge paywall, you know?
Anyways.
Look, I make a lot of content you can buy, basically.
Get it while it's low, because one day...
One day,
not
B
gonna
is gonna beat me into charging $600 or something.
One day, I'm gonna bully them into knowing their worth. Bully and love them into knowing their worth. But in the meantime,
Let me sit on my microphone now. There we go. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, y'all, I can't. Let me go
But
figure out.
you need a healthy dose of chaos in your life, and I'm that healthy dose of chaos. I'm just throwing it out there.
As if I'm not chaotic already.
I just add to your chaos. You know what I mean?
You
I'm like,
feel
oh, you're
it.
chaotic.
There's no chaos threshold, okay? We can take as much as we would like.
Look, I'm the coochie fairy for a reason. That was a
I love that
accident,
title,
by the way.
Yeah, B was telling me that story, and I was like, yeah, I respect that.
Yeah, the official title in the Discord, which I will not be changing for recruitment. New members will enter, and there will be a full staff member titled the Coochie Fairy.
Look, that's how you know it's real, all right? Honestly, there's no performance in that team, and I think that's why I feel so welcome there, because it really is. It's just people as they are, you know. And I think we need more of that.
Act chaotic as heck. All right, my loves. Thank you for sharing space with us. I am going to, I have to unfortunately work later, which is not normally part of my schedule. But you know, Starbucks is rude and don't schedule me for any hours, so I had to pick up somebody else's shift. So I will have to wrap things up. But I do have a very good bean who is doing a charity stream right now for Doctors Without Borders. So I think we're gonna pass on the love to this wonderful bean, and you know, do the thing that we do at the end of stream. Y'all, knock on wood, but we made it through a stream without being harassed. What a concept!
I'm
it's a beautiful day.
We don't know her.
I was like, I keep having this part of why I had in the stream. I'm like, I feel like as soon as I go live, it's just gonna be like, she's here, attack.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and the
It feels that way on
anxiety
Twitch right now.
is valid, but thank you for the space. Thank you for everyone who, you know, hung out with us in chat as well. Yeah, you know, spending your time here. I always like to say, you know, time is like your most valuable resource, and you're sharing it with us, which is incredible. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And the bean is playing Fall Guys, so I hope you laugh after, you know, good deep morning cozy conversations. I hope you can go get some giggles and support a wonderful cause. So I'll see you all next time.
Bye. Thanks everyone.
Oh my god.
Okay, you are no longer